Hello, and welcome to my second video. Today's deck tech will be on one of my more favorite decks, Abzan Persist deck. Any of you who have watched my Sliver video, I do apologize on that one. That was my first video I've done in a long time, and I was feeling a bit awkward when I made it. But anyway, this deck takes full advantage of the mechanic Persist, which is basically when the creature is put into the graveyard, it returns back to the battlefield with a -1/-1 counter on it. We'll get into that mechanic a little more, but let's get right down to breaking down the deck so that way you can see how the deck is laid out. Anyway, first up on the deck we have Inquisition of Kozilek, because it's always good to rip our opponent's hand apart, and we will be running not one, not two, but 3 copies of Inquisition of Kozilek in the deck. Next up, of course, if you're in Abzan and you are running a creature deck, Collecting Company is a necessity. It's basically a 2-for-1. 2 creatures for 1, unless you get a nice punt, which has happened to me quite often. But anyhow, Collected Company, very strong card. We are running 4 copies of Collected Company in the deck. Next up is one of our first sack outlets, because we need sack outlets for the Persist. Otherwise, it's just not going to function as well. Viscera Seer allows us to sacrifice a creature and to scry one, which basically sets up our deck. And as you'll see as the deck goes on, it's just a permanent setup of the deck with Viscera Seer. So 1/1 for 1 black. And we run 4 copies of Viscera Seer. Yes, so I have a foil one in the deck. That is it. Next up, our second sack outlet is Cartel Aristocrat. This one is a black and white. It's a 2/2, sack another creature. Cartel Aristocrat gains protection from color of your choice until end of turn. So it's able to protect itself against things like Lightning Bolt, Fatal Push, Abrupt Decay, anything like that. Just a way to protect your sack outlet, because once people know how the deck is running, that is one of the things they will definitely try to hit right away. And we are running 4 copies of Cartel Aristocrat in the deck also. So that gives us 8 sack outlets in the deck for Collected Companies to be able to hit things like our sack outlet. Another very key piece in this is Blood Artist. Whenever another creature dies, target player loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. Very, very powerful card. 0/1 for 1 and a black. You could also, there's another creature you could also run. Name is escaping me at the moment, but there's another one. Is a 1/1 for the same mana cost. But we are running 4 copies of Blood Artist. I may even have one in the sideboard as a secondary. And quick flip through the sideboard. No, I am not. Okay, anyway, next we come to our creatures to sacrifice. Safehold Elite, 2/2 for 1 and a hybrid green-white. Persist. Basically, that is just an excellent scry engine. Also allows for a nice, easy turn 3 kill if you can get everything set up, or turn 4 kill, rather. If you can get everything set up, or at least you can scry it in on turn 3, you'll be able to scry into what you need to finish the game off. We run 4 copies of Safehold Elite in the deck. Yes, again, 1 foil of I own. Next up, our second sacrificial target is Kitchen Finks, and why not? Kitchen Finks, when it comes into play, you gain 2 life with Persist. 3/2 for 1 and 2 green or 2 white. Hybrid mana again. And this card, again, very powerful, played in a lot of modern decks that are green or white, a lot of times just as a sideboard card for the life gain. We run 4 copies of Kitchen Finks. We want to be able to hit our sack outlets, and as you see, everything is hittable by Collected Company, except for our 1 copy of Murderous Redcap, because Murderous Redcap costs 4 mana, so we only run 1 copy of it, so that way we're not running into 2 of them on a Collected Company, and that's all we're getting. Murderous Redcap is 2, and hybrid mana, 2 black, 2 red. When it comes into play, it deals damage equal to its power to target creature or player with Persist, and again, it is a 2/2. Next up, we have the ways to control our counters so our persist creatures don't get counters on them. And this is actually a little bit a more heavier piece of our deck. We have Melira Silvok Outcast. For 1 and a green, she's a 2/2. You can't get poison counters. Creatures you control can't have -1 counters placed on them. And creatures your opponents control lose effect. Infect players hate seeing Melira come out. It makes them have to play a fair game of Magic. But also, Melira makes it so that way our persist creatures never get the -1 counter on them when they come back into play. However, because she is legendary, we only run 3 copies of her. We don't want to see her as much as the next card in our list, which is Vizier of Remedies. Now, when this came out, this just made this deck a little more broken because it gave another way to keep our persist creatures from getting -1 counters on them. Vizier of Remedies, for 1 and a white, it's a 2/1. If 1 or more -1 counters would be put on a creature you control, that many -1 counters -1 are put on instead. That also makes Vizier of Remedies very functional with Devoted Druid, because it technically sees the counter being put on, but then it says that -1 of them is put on, which makes the Vizier of Druid Remedies an infinite combo for mana. But we're not using this for mana, we're using it to keep the counters off our persist creatures. We run 4 copies of Vizier. Yes, again, I do have a foil in the deck. 4th copy. Next is Solemnity. In case we run into very heavy creature removal, this is just an extra way to keep the counters off of our persist creatures. This also is very functional with a sideboard card of ours, which we will get to in just a little bit. We'll be getting to the sideboard, which basically makes it almost impossible for our opponents to beat us. Almost impossible. But Solemnity is an enchantment. It's 2 and a white. It says players can't get counters. Counters can't be put on artifacts, creatures, enchantments, or lands. This also plays very heavily against Hardened Scales, again against Infect, and a lot of other decks requiring counters. I've actually had people playing Hardened Scales decks that have scooped the entire match when this has come out on game 1. We run 3 copies of Solemnity in the main board. 2, 3, and then we go to just an odd, janky piece for the deck, but a bit of a beater. Anafenza the Foremost. She costs 1 white, 1 black, 1 green, and whenever she attacks, put a +1 counter on another tapped creature you control. So if you have to go to the aggro route, she just keeps pumping everything up. But another thing that she's incredibly good for is against any graveyard deck. If a creature would be put into an opponent's graveyard from anywhere, exile it instead. Shuts off Dredge, shuts off Phoenix, really messes with Hollow One deck, any Reanimator deck. Just messes with them badly. And we run 2 copies of Anafenza in the main board. Then we get to our mana base. Mana base, we run 3 Verdant Catacombs. 2. 3rd copy. Windswept Heath. 1, 2, 3 copies of Windswept Heath. 1 Overgrown Tomb. 2 Temple Garden. Yes, another foil. 2 copies of Godless Shrine. If I can grab it. 1 Blooming Marsh. Only 1, because if we see it anywhere besides turn 1, 2, or 3, it can affect the way our deck plays. Not to mention the fact we also have these. A Stirring Wildwood, which enters the battlefield tap, but sometimes you just have to go on the aggro route, and 1 Shambling Vent. Against heavy board wipes, most of those are sorcery, so you will get to keep those from throughout the entire game unless somebody pushes them, paths them, etc. And then we go into the basics. We have 2 plains. If I can grab the second one. We run 2 swamps, or 2 forests, and we run 2 swamps. And that is the mana base for the deck. And that is the entire main body of the deck. Now, to move on to the sideboard of the deck. Okay, and in the sideboard, we run 1 copy of Fragmentize. Face it, Leyline of Sanctity can be a bear to get past. Also, if you have to go on the aggro route, it also deals with Ensnaring Bridge. Next, we have Creeping Corrosion. Again, to deal with artifact decks. Now that KCI has been banned, KCI isn't so much of a problem, but Affinity does show up. Lantern Control, and again, just an extra piece to deal with a Hardened Scales deck, but yeah, 1 copy of Creeping Corrosion. Then we run 1 copy of Kataki, again, more Artifact Hate, 1 copy of Stony Silence, and you may want to change the sideboard. Where I play, they play a lot of heavy Artifact. 1 copy of Gruesome Menagerie just lets you put the entire combo right back onto the battlefield. 1 Engineered Explosives against token decks and some of the other go wide decks. 1 Maelstrom Pulse, again to get rid of and remove pesky things like Ensnaring Bridge. Then, to go with Solemnity, we have Phyrexian Unlife. If you're going against something that's a little harder to deal with and a little too fast, 3 copies of Phyrexian Unlife comes in, makes it very hard to remove us from the game. Then we've got 1 copy of Burned and Forge Tender, protection from red, sacrifice and prevent all damage from a red source. Very good against Anger of the Gods. Core Firewalker, protection from red. Whenever they play a red spell, you gain a life. Again, because Burnt is pretty heavy. Same with Auroch Champion, but also from black. Whenever a creature enters, you gain 1 life. Really heavy with Kitchen Finks. Then we have 1 copy of Choke for control decks. 1 copy of Abrupt Decay. Again, control decks that we have something we need to remove. There's the sideboard, and thank you all for watching, and please leave comments or subscribe, and I will have more videos for you as we go.